The journey of a death row inmate begins with the moment of arrest, a moment often clouded with chaos, fear, and resistance. Law enforcement typically apprehends the suspect shortly after a heinous crime has been committed, such as murder, terrorism, or a similarly capital offense. These are not routine arrests. They often involve special units, media attention, and heightened security due to the gravity of the crime. Once in custody, the suspect is interrogated, and evidence is gathered to build a strong case for prosecution. Following the arrest, the legal system moves quickly but thoroughly. The suspect is formally charged and brought before a court. Pre-trial hearings may last for weeks or even months as lawyers on both sides prepare for what could become a nationally followed case. For the prosecution, the goal is to establish guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. For the defense, it's a desperate attempt to avoid the ultimate punishment, death. Both sides often bring in expert witnesses, forensic specialists, and psychologists to strengthen their positions. The trial itself is intense. The courtroom becomes a battleground of facts, testimonies, and emotions. Victims' families are often present, seeking justice, while the accused is either defiant or silent, surrounded by guards. The media may also play a role, shaping public opinion. If the jury finds the defendant guilty, the trial moves into the sentencing phase. This is where the court decides if the crime is severe enough to warrant the death penalty. During sentencing, the defense may present mitigating factors, such as mental illness, a history of abuse, or lack of intent, to plead for life imprisonment instead of execution. However, if the jury or judge is convinced that the crime was cold-blooded, calculated, or especially brutal, they may hand down the harshest sentence allowed by law: death. Once sentenced, the individual is no longer just a prisoner. They are now officially a death row inmate. This marks the beginning of a long, isolated, and psychologically grueling path through the prison system. Though the legal process continues through appeals, the original sentencing moment becomes the defining point in the inmate's life, where the countdown to execution unofficially begins. Once sentenced to death, the inmate is transferred to a highly secure section of the prison known as death row. Here, life is starkly different from the general prison population. In most facilities, inmates on death row are kept in solitary confinement for 22 to 24 hours a day. Their cells are small, often just 6 by 9 feet, furnished with only the bare essentials: a steel bed, a toilet, a sink, and perhaps a small shelf. There are no personal belongings beyond a few books or legal documents. These inmates are under constant surveillance. They are escorted in handcuffs and sometimes shackles, even when moving short distances within the prison. Human interaction is extremely limited. Meals are pushed through a small slot in the door. There are no communal dining areas or recreational yards in most death row facilities. Some prisons allow 1 hour of isolated exercise in a small caged yard. Others offer no physical activity at all. Living in such extreme isolation has a profound psychological impact. Inmates often suffer from anxiety, depression, paranoia, and hallucinations. The silence is deafening, and the lack of human contact wears down even the strongest minds. The constant awareness of impending death creates a mental burden that's hard to describe. Some inmates begin to lose their sense of time, others their sense of self. The walls seem to close in more with each passing day. The emotional toll is worsened by the slow pace of the legal system. Death row inmates often spend 10 to 20 years awaiting execution, living in limbo, neither fully alive nor allowed to die. Some cling to hope through appeals and legal battles, while others sink into hopelessness, knowing that each appeal denial brings them closer to the end. A few inmates turn to religion or writing as a coping mechanism. Some form bonds with pen pals or advocacy groups on the outside, giving them a small thread of connection to the world they left behind. But even these comforts are fragile. In the end, life on death row is not just a punishment of the body. It is a slow erosion of the mind and spirit. Every day becomes a mental battle, not just against time, but against isolation, fear, and despair. A death sentence is not the end of the legal road. It's the beginning of a long, complex, and often exhausting legal battle. After the initial conviction, the inmate has the constitutional right to appeal their sentence through multiple stages. This appeal process is not only a safeguard against wrongful executions, but it also serves to ensure that the trial was fair, the evidence valid, and the sentence legally appropriate. The first stage is usually the direct appeal, where the inmate's legal team argues that errors were made during the trial, such as improper jury instructions, mishandled evidence, or prosecutorial misconduct. This appeal is automatically reviewed by a higher court. If it's denied, the inmate can proceed to post-conviction appeals, where new evidence or constitutional violations, like ineffective assistance of counsel, can be presented. These legal battles can drag on for years, even decades. Each step requires exhaustive legal documentation, expert testimony, and rigorous court hearings. Lawyers working on death penalty cases often face immense pressure. They must comb through every detail of the original trial, find legal loopholes, and sometimes even reinvestigate the entire case. In some instances, new DNA evidence or recanted testimonies have overturned convictions, saving lives. However, the appeals process is not just about law, it's also about time. Every delay can mean one more year of life for the inmate, and for some, that hope is enough. But for others, repeated denials take a devastating emotional toll. Knowing that a court has once again refused to intervene can push inmates deeper into depression or mental instability. When legal options run out, one final hope remains: clemency. Clemency is an act of mercy granted by a governor, at the state level, or the president, in federal cases. It can take the form of a reduced sentence, changing death to life imprisonment, or a full pardon. However, clemency is rarely granted and often influenced by political pressure, public opinion, or media scrutiny. Throughout this process, legal aid organizations, advocacy groups, and even international human rights bodies may become involved, especially in controversial or high-profile cases. Still, for most death row inmates, the appeals process is a race against time, where the clock is always ticking and each courtroom decision could mean the difference between life and death. When a death row inmate exhausts all legal options and an execution date is set, a new and haunting phase begins: the final countdown. These last days are filled with rituals, procedures, and deeply emotional moments. The prison staff, chaplains, legal representatives, and sometimes even psychologists become involved in preparing the inmate for death, both physically and mentally. One of the most well-known traditions is the last meal. Though not practiced in all jurisdictions, many death row inmates are allowed to choose their final meal, usually within a modest budget. Some request comfort food from childhood, fried chicken, hamburgers, or pie, while others refuse to eat anything at all. The request becomes symbolic, a moment of human choice before the state takes control for the final time. Spiritual guidance is another key element. Many inmates turn to religion in their final days, seeking peace, forgiveness, or redemption. Chaplains or spiritual advisors often visit daily, offering prayers, confessions, or simply companionship. For those who have no one else, the chaplain may be the only person by their side when the end comes. Final words are carefully recorded and preserved. Just before the execution, the inmate is offered the chance to speak, often through a microphone in the execution chamber. Some use this moment to express remorse, ask for forgiveness, proclaim innocence, or say goodbye to loved ones. Others choose silence. These statements can carry emotional weight not only for the inmate's family, but also for the victims' families, who may be present behind a glass wall, watching the execution unfold. Family visits in the final 24 to 48 hours are perhaps the most emotionally charged moments. Inmates may be allowed a final visit with loved ones, often separated by thick glass or in tightly controlled settings. Hugs and physical contact are usually not permitted. Conversations are short, filled with sorrow, regret, love, and sometimes tears. These farewells are never easy. Each word carries the weight of finality. As the execution nears, the inmate is placed under constant watch, often in a special holding cell near the execution chamber. Every detail is controlled. The mood is quiet, heavy, and surreal. After years of isolation, appeals, and waiting, everything comes down to these last few hours, where time becomes more real and death no longer feels like a distant concept but an imminent reality. Execution Day marks the final chapter in a death row inmate's journey, a moment that is orchestrated with military-like precision. Every step is governed by strict protocol to ensure the process appears orderly, controlled, and legally compliant. While methods vary by state or country, lethal injection is the most commonly used form of execution today, followed by the electric chair, firing squad, gas chamber, or hanging in rare instances. The day typically begins with the inmate waking early in their specially monitored cell. They are offered a final shower, a change into clean clothes, and, if permitted, their last meal. Throughout the day, they are under constant observation by correctional officers and often accompanied by a chaplain or spiritual advisor. Their demeanor is recorded, and every interaction is documented for the official record. As the scheduled time approaches, the warden gives the final orders. The inmate is escorted, sometimes restrained, to the execution chamber, a sterile room where the sentence will be carried out. For lethal injection, the inmate is placed on a gurney and strapped down by arms, legs, and chest. Medical personnel, often not licensed doctors due to ethical concerns, insert IV lines into suitable veins. 3 drugs are usually used in sequence: a sedative to render unconsciousness, a paralytic to stop muscle movement, and a drug to stop the heart. In the case of the electric chair, the inmate is strapped into the seat with a metal skull cap and electrodes attached to the body. When activated, a high-voltage current surges through the body, stopping the heart and damaging vital organs. Before the procedure begins, the witness room is open to a select group of people: prison officials, journalists, legal representatives, and sometimes family members of both the inmate and the victim. A microphone is offered for the inmate to deliver their last words, often a brief, emotional farewell, apology, or statement of innocence. Once the execution is complete, a medical examiner confirms death. The time is officially recorded and the inmate's body is removed. A death certificate is issued and the body is either returned to the family or buried by the state. The entire process, while clinical on the surface, is emotionally heavy for everyone involved, from prison staff to witnesses. Behind the procedural efficiency lies the stark finality of the justice system's most irreversible sentence: death.